That's not meant quite how it's meant to happen. It should be like this. How are we all doing today? Welcome along to this another Sunday evening live stream. It is Sunday, the 30th of March, 2025. It's been Mother's Day, of course, which is why everything's in a bit of a manic. My mother finally left about half an hour ago, so it was a little bit, are we going to have time? Thankfully, it all came together. How are we all doing today anyway? Today, we're going to be... I've just realised I haven't gone live over on Instagram. I'll hit that now. Today, we're going to be... That was a weird noise there. Today, we're going to be talking about small space gardening. I want to find out your tips for small space gardening. Before we get into that, let's find out if anybody is actually in the audience. And we got Kate there saying good evening, Veg Army. Good evening to you. Turbo Streamers there saying good evening, Veg Podcasters. Good evening to you. Stuart Jackson, evening, Richard and Veg Army. Good evening to you. Hargrave Gas, evening, everyone. Hope you've had a great week. Really good weather here this weekend, so finally got a lot done. Lucky you. Chris Garden and Allotment Journey. Hi, everyone. Welcome along, Chris. Lovely to see you. Jenny is there saying, hello, everyone. Hope you are well. I'm here, but may leave early as it's Mother's Day and the kids have plans. Fair enough. Fair enough. Nathan, Allotted Chef. Good evening, all. Glorious weather. Indeed it is. Digwell is back with some more culture. Hasunja Grasskoda Poditaria, which is Swedish for greetings, veg grower podcast viewers. I probably got that completely wrong, but I gave it a go. Tigwell says to Jenny, go there, no loyalty, we don't need part-timers here. Scott says to good evening, seat to table, plot 13, of course. Anna Jones, good evening, gardeners, good evening to you. Rebecca, evening, Richard. I'm the same. She'll be listening in the background as her family here. Fair enough, fair enough. Jenny says, fine, I'm off. Bye, Digwell. Let's all behave. Let's all good behave. Adrian says, hi, Richard and all. Good evening to you. Digwell's laughing. And Rob says, a good tip is to use small tools. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's get into small space gardening. Actually, let's check Instagram first. Anna has joined over on the Anne, it may be. Has joined over on Instagram. Small space gardening. Anyway, let's get into it. So, what is small space gardening? And this is one of those things that I've often seen comes up in many magazines because I think more people have smaller gardens than have big gardens. And I think as we get more and more into our gardening, we tend to want to expand and have more garden space. But in some ways, I think having a smaller garden forces you to be a bit more organized, a bit tidier, and a bit more like you can only grow what you want to grow. So I guess really the first thing I would say is, what is your first tip that you would share to somebody who's asked for tips for small space gardening? And when I first, not so much when I first, when I first started growing, I was gardening in my parents' garden. I had a small little area that I grew food in. But I guess when I moved in with Amanda, we had a very, very, very tiny garden. It was 12 meters long by 5 meters wide, and it had hardly any space. So we did have to try and make the most of the space that we had there. But what I felt after I moved out and moved into this house, my skills had improved so much that if I went back to that small space garden, I would probably be more productive. I would be having trees that are trained to be step overs to make room or to make use of that space and still be able to grow apple trees or pear trees in a small area, possibly fan trained trees and espalier trees to try and grow some fruit. So yeah, I think the first thing I would say is to think outside the box. Don't let the trouble of having a small space feel like it holds you back. You've just got to be a bit creative. So Digwell says, all my gardening is small space gardening, really? Digwell, elaborate on that, please. That would be good. Rob says, good evening, all. Good evening to you. Chris says, I have a huge allotment. I've got a fair size allotment. I've got a fair size garden. So I am hoping that more people are going to be sharing their tips for small space gardening. Turbo Stream says, I suppose the obvious question, what is classed as a small space? That's a good question, actually, because is a half size allotment small? I would say it's not small because I know somebody that's got a quarter plot and that is small. What is a small space? What would be classed as a small space garden? Good question. Stuart says plan, plan, plan. That's his tip. Plan, plan, plan. Indeed. Chili Kate says, hi, Richard. Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. Lovely to see you, Chili Kate. Hope you are well. Highgrave Gas says, my problem having only a limited amount of space is I can't stop myself sowing too many seeds and buying too many plants. I need some discipline, but just don't have it in me. See, I don't think this is a problem that it just sticks with small space gardeners. I have a reasonable size garden, but especially when it comes to seedlings, I've got way too many. I'm trying to fight for space to try and get more space. So it is a problem. I think no matter how small your space is, you're always going to want more. Let's have a quick check on Instagram. Nothing going on over there. Anna says, remove a lawn and use the space for growing, which is actually something I completely agree with. I do prefer, personally, I prefer grass paths over having wood chip paths or something like that, just because then it gives you green material. But of course, then you need lawn mowers and things like that. So it may not be quite for everybody, but for me, I think getting rid of a lawn and turning that over to growing plants is probably a good step. Turbo Stream says, my allotment is half a plot and then sectioned into 4 sections. Each section is around 16 foot square. I would say that each section is a small garden, I guess you could say. Digwell says, I do quite a bit of square foot gardening, but I do not use the suggested compost mix. I know you do not like it, Richard, but it is very productive. It takes a lot from companion garden space usage. So actually, this is a good point. Actually, square space or square foot gardening is a method of gardening where you divide your growing space into square foot and you grow so many of each plant inside that square foot. It's meant to be very, very good for small spaced gardening, and it does, from what I've read, it does work very, very well. I tried doing it several times in the past. Where I failed is that you have to be incredibly organized. And what I mean by that is that as soon as you finish harvesting something, let's say carrots, you have to have plants or seeds to go in there as soon as that space becomes available. If you are incredibly organized, it can work. And again, I come back to the fact, if you've got a small space, you do need to be incredibly organized, but you also have, you're not going to get bogged down with details that make it a little bit easier. Scott says, if I had a small space, I would only grow what I couldn't buy in the shops. Now, that's a very interesting angle, because actually one of the things that people will often say when it comes to small space is only grow what is expensive in the shops, which is good advice. But the argument would be you can buy a bag of carrots for 20p, which is true. But my argument against that is always that a bag of carrots doesn't taste anywhere near as good as carrots that you've grown yourself. If you've got space to grow carrots and you eat a lot of carrots, grow carrots. But yeah, this is good idea there. Chris says, good idea is to interplant in smaller areas and sequential sowing, so there is always something ready to replace crops when harvested. Now, again, this comes back to square space gardening, which is, you've got to be very, very organized, I find anyway, and it does work. I can't say it doesn't work. It does work. You just got to be very, very organized. And of course, if you're harvesting your parsnips, they've got to be followed up by something else. Chili Cake, before I got an allotment, I had just 2 raised beds in my garden, 1 by 2 meter, I think. There's not much space. It's not too dissimilar to what I had as well. Digwell says my allotment is only 6 by 13 meters, so not much bigger than my back garden I had in my old house. It was tiny. It was postage stamp sized, especially as it had to have various other things be in the garden. Stuart Jackson says another tip is to use walls and fences to grow up. I certainly think vertical gardening has a lot to say for it when you are in a small space. So you do grow up. It could be you having pumpkins growing up or strawberries in hanging baskets and things like that. Definitely something to think about. Definitely something to expand upon and try and make the most of growing up. Nicholas says, evening, Richard and all, loving the lighter evening. It is nice, isn't it? It is nice to get some lighter evenings. Now, Digwell says, wood chip paths help feed the soil as it rots down, which is true. Yes, they do. I just prefer grass clippings because I feel grass clippings are good for mulch and they're good for compost. Two things that I think we need a lot of in a garden, especially in a small space garden, to make your garden that much easier. Turbo Extreme says the main veg grown section is then subdivided into smaller sections. The brassicas are grown in 1 meter by 1.8 meter, so that is small space. I think I'm coming back. I think we do have to come back to that question: is what is a small space? What does anybody define as a small space? I'm going to throw that question out there first, actually. Let's answer that. What is a small space garden? Digwell says, surely successional sowing is required in any style of gardening if you want maximum productivity. And I agree. Yes, absolutely. I just find that with square foot gardening, you have to be really, really on it because you have such a small space that it's very quick to turn it over. But I do agree, successional sowing. So constantly having, like when my garlic comes out, I can then still plant some beans, or my first early potatoes, I can still plant some leeks. That is sort of succession sowing. It's making sure the beds are productive all year round. Kate says, my old house had a small garden, but I would use more pots and stack upwards on shelving and hanging baskets for fruits like strawberries. Shelving going up the fence, again, all good ideas. Making use or making use of that floor space by going up and growing more. You have 3 or 4 shelves, you quadrupled the amount of growing space that you have. Rob says, I have half plot and it's big enough for the 2 of us. I come back to that question I'm asking. What is a small space? What do you define as a small space garden? I need to get better at, says Kate, at succession sowing. And I agree. Digwell says, love carrots, but I'd rather use Tesco ones in stews and casseroles and save my own for the cardon blue dishes. Again, that's not a bad idea. But what I would say is, would it be better if you had the space to grow lots of carrots that you didn't have to rely on Tesco's for your stews and casseroles? Wouldn't that be better? Again, I come back to if you have space. Turbo Stream says, I have another square section for soft fruit and rhubarb, which is permanently planted. Now, here's a good question, actually. Permanent planting in small spaces. Is that something you would do? Is that space that you would have for things like currants or apple trees? Digwell says, I'm just making a gallows to grow runner beans, 32 plants in 4 square foot. What do you mean by gallows? Explain to me, or should I wait and see? Rebecca says it's definitely more manageable when you have a smaller space. Agree with that. I broke my back garden up into sections to make it more manageable to work. That way, just work on one section a week. Now, again, I totally agree with that. I do think if you break it down into small sections, it does make life easier if you have a bigger garden, of course. And I think the same, I just saw a flash on the screen there. I think it's the same when we have a bigger garden too. A smaller garden, you can still break it down and just work in one section every day. There was, again, don't know what's going on there. If you want to see a good example, look at Lee, aka Skinny Jean Garner, fence panel garden. That was a 6 foot by 6 foot garden. He squeezed a lot in there. Absolutely no grass from what I remember. Squeezed a lot in there. Put bean netting at 45-degree angle to the ground and use the ground underneath for a crop that likes shadier space. So basically selecting plants that do well in the conditions provided. Using other plants to create shading, which is perfect for something like that loves shade, maybe lettuce or something, makes a lot of sense. So yeah, being selective with your plants is a good idea as well. The third section is reserved for big space plants, i.e. squash or courgettes. The fourth is mostly a flower bed with spaces for things like root crops. Chris says growing in containers is great for small areas. Absolutely. And again, that's something I do out in the front garden. Container gardening is definitely a way forward. Toby Stream says, I will be into planting again this year as it seemed to work last year. Gardening for a Zombie Apocalypse is a good book for small space gardening. I've got that book somewhere. I had those on the podcast years ago. I must revisit the zombies for Halloween, sorry. A small space is under 10 square meters, but it may be smaller. I think I can go with that. 10 square meters sounds. Hang on. Yeah. 10 square meters. Does that sound about right for a small? No. I don't know. What's a small garden? Like Rebecca, I like sections, so I can only work on one section each time I go. Thing I would say, if you're working on one section each time you go, you've got to go regularly to keep on top of it. If you break it down into 8 sections and you only work on one section every week, it'll take you 8 weeks to go around the whole lot. So it's got to be broken down based on how often you go. 59p for 1 kilo of wonky carrots. Taste okay, especially in a stew. Again, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Jenny says, use permanent plants like trees as a structure for beans, tomatoes, etc. Also, everything works in a container. I've grown trees, corns, pumpkin, etc., all in pots with great success. I think anything will grow in a container. It's just when you grow in a container, the plant that is in that container is going to be more reliant on you for water and for food. So you do have to look after it a little bit more, but everything can grow in a container. And it says, I have lots of crops in pots in our backyard. Lots of really good dwarf varieties available for pots. Excellent. And Digger says, video of the gallows coming soon. First bit was uploaded today. If you want to find out more about Digger's gallows, you know where to go. Andrew says, evening all, will be listening as I walk Zorro. It's lovely now the clocks have changed. Yes, it is lovely. I'm looking out the window. It's 20 past 6 and it's still light, which means when I come home from work, it's going to be light. Chris says you can create a garden on a balcony. I actually tried creating a balcony garden here at home a couple of years ago. And I did enjoy actually having a small space, but it wasn't the best use of space. And we could have done better. Dig Well says it's all relative. What is small for you is big for me, for example. I agree. It is relative because I consider my garden to be average size. It's not huge, but it's not small at the same time. Others might say it's huge, but others might also say it's tiny. This year I will grow potatoes in grow bags and pots. Last year they were mostly eaten by slugs, says Turbo Stream. So are you saying that with your small space, you grow potatoes in grow bags and pots because that makes sense of the space? Let me know. Back on in our first house was 7x5, says Rob. Jenny said, oh no, here we go. Oh, Nicholas says, thumbs up, everyone. Indeed, give us a thumbs up. Let's check on Instagram because I've got to keep remembering to check Instagram. Nothing going on over there. But let's continue this on. So I'm coming back to small space gardening. I think when it comes to small space gardening, one thing that we have to do is to try and make sure we use all of the space that we have available. This is really important, actually, because one of the things that I learned in our old place is that I didn't use the front garden. It was just a grass area. There was a privet bush at first, which we cut down, but I didn't really use that space to the fullest. Had I used that front garden, I could have actually grown much more food. And this is something that I changed when we moved into this house. I have started using the front garden, as you know, for my fruit trees, fruit bushes that's starting to bud. Uh, Using all the space available was very, very important. And I think it was Anna who said earlier to not use or to get rid of a lawn. Use the lawn to grow food or grow plants, whatever you may be choosing. And again, I'm with you on that. The main reason that I have lawn is as paths, as walking places, and for Roxy to enjoy. Where were we? Where are we? Turbo Stream says, I do have space for potatoes, but last year when dug them up, they were full of holes. I'm trying to think what I would recommend. A bit of not slug pellets, but wool pellets may keep the slugs away. Hi, Nicola, says Chris. Nathan says Chris Collins grows loads on his balcony, small space, crams loads in, uses vertical gardening and container to its extreme. Indeed, he does. Indeed, he does. And this is, again, it just goes to show that there are no limits to what you can do if you use your space effective. And Chris, I mean, I've got a lot of time for Chris Collins anyway. He really does know his stuff, and he's a larger than life character as well. Digworth says, my front garden looks like the one in The Good Life. Excellent. Excellent. This is exactly what I mean. I mean, The Good Life, that comedy series from the 70s, was it? Maybe the 80s? That kind of proved that how much you could grow. I mean, okay, it's a TV series, but it proved how much you could grow, how much space you could have if you used your entire garden. Admittedly, they did have a large garden, but they were in Surbiton, so not that large, really. Jenny says the green wall pocket planters are good if you have a small space. I've got one of those, actually. Most have a built-in reservoir for water and great for herbs, dwarf beans, strawberries, tumble toms, and salads. So that actually, the first thing that jumped out at my mind there is, sorry, let me, when you mentioned herbs in that comment, because that's something I think every small space garden should concentrate on growing on first. Well, everybody who's into edible gardening should be concentrating on growing herbs first. For me, herbs are one of the most used items in the kitchen, which is why I think it's always worth growing lots of herbs first. I rate them more important. And I say that because you might be growing rosemary, oregano, or coriander or parsley. You're going to use those in pretty much every meal you cook if you use a lot of herbs like I do. And something like oregano or oregano, depends on how you pronounce it. Like you make a simple cheese on toast, which who doesn't like cheese on toast, unless of course you're lactose intolerant or something. Sprinkle some oregano on top. It transforms that simple cheese and toast into something much more gourmet. And that for me is why herbs are always top of my list of something that we should grow in a small space. What's your thoughts on something to grow or what you should concentrate on growing in a small space? Digworth says, being a short asket, vertical gardening is a pain. Again, I had a friend of mine who will remain anonymous, but some of you may know him. He had a very tiny north-facing garden. It wasn't really a garden, it was a yard. And he was looking at vertical gardening. But what we were, again, he's fairly short as well. One of the things that I was looking at doing with him, unfortunately, it never happened because he wasn't that interested, despite what he talked about. But what I wanted to do was create like hanging baskets, hanging pots that were on like a pulley system, so you could lower them down and get to the plants easy. So no matter how short, how tall you are, you could easily get to all the plants with a pulley system, and yet pot them up out the way when you didn't need access to them. It would work. I'm sure it would work. A bit like I want to call the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Uh, Termin Stream says, I will probably downsize to a quarter plot at some point in the future. I could grow the soft fruit at home in containers, for example. You know, I do believe the more, as much as I love an allotment, the more we can grow at home, the more likely it is we're going to use it. Rebecca says, big fan of planting in front gardens. Me too. Me too. I need to spend more time in my front garden, actually. But it's so much more social, isn't it? A bit like an allotment. People walk past and you have conversations, but I do need to spend a bit of time in my front garden. Toby Stream says, I don't grow herbs. You're missing out. You are missing out. Again, I should say only if you eat herbs, but I think herbs are essential in my kitchen. Stuart says, I think if your house was built before 2000, you probably got a large garden. Nah, not necessarily. After that, gardens seemed to get small because nobody wanted a large garden, or so they say. I think it was going on even in the 80s. The sort of terraced gardens were getting smaller and smaller. But even bigger houses were getting smaller and smaller, aren't they? Postage stamped houses. Toby Stream, very rarely add herbs to a meal, perhaps some dried and mixed herbs in a soup. You're missing out. In my opinion, you're missing out. That's just me. Stuart has a question. How much land do you need to grow enough food for a family of 4? Well, the old way of thinking, particularly during the rationing, was that you needed sort of 250 square meters, I think it was, in order to feed a family of 4. But that was during rationing when we were all growing everything as much as we could, trying to make the most of the space that we had. So with certain skills that we have available to us now, such as square foot gardening, although I'm not a fan of it, I reckon you could actually reduce that down. Oh, somebody at my front door. Reduce that down to probably 100 square meters, maybe less than that. But I could be wrong. Stuart says herbs are a must for a small space garden. With you. I am the silent majority. Why don't you just throw a bucket of mud on the floor? Oh, same from The Good Life. Turbo Stream says the garden you mentioned was a wood store, mostly if it's the same person. Exactly that person. Yes. You know what I'm talking about. You probably heard him mention it a few times. My Good Life front garden has one big downside. It is the only one out of 30 houses with exposed soil. Perfect cat latrine. So here's my thought as well. When it comes to small space gardening, I can't help but think that what you really need are some raised beds. I'm a big fan of the Veggie Pod, and I think they are perfect in a small garden. I think Digwell's got a few in his, but the Veg Trug are a wooden alternative. I think they are what you need in a small garden because they make more use of the space that you have. They're going to be more productive in my eyes, and you can store things underneath them as well should you need to. Amanda has joined Evening News. Sorry, I'm late. Great topic for me as I'm currently sprucing my 10 by 7 meter front yard, all concrete slabs. I'm trying to get loads of Saturdays, spring onions, and herbs going this year. So here we go, actually. Here we go, Amanda, straight in with a small garden from her experience or that she has. And she's already saying salad leaves, spring onions, herbs, all things that I think are great in a small garden as well. Digwell says 1960s semi-detached house were built with a garden to provide for a family of 4. Didn't they used to include cutting gardens as well for flowers, as well as a nice seating area, of course, as well. Let's quickly check on Instagram. Nothing going on over there. So yeah, if you have a small space garden, I'm going to throw this up. If you have a small spaced garden, what would you be growing? As I've already said, herbs would be top of my list. Following on from that, it would be things like salad leaves and salad crops. Again, we eat salads every day. In fact, my lunch at work is salads with a bit of meat added to it. So Let me just grab that swig of coffee. So salads for me are something else I would definitely grow. Cut and cam again salads as well, or in particular, because they're harvestable. You can go in, harvest them on a daily basis. They'll grow back, and you just get plenty of salads. Added to that, not just salad leaves, things like spring onions and some other salady crops, mustards, spinach, things that you can make lots and lots of harvests of. And don't forget things like beetroot as well. Now, beetroot is probably not something that everybody likes to eat. Beetroot and turnips are good examples for all I'm going to say. But you get two crops from one because beetroots, turnips, the leaves are edible. And then if you pick the leaves when they're young, that is, but don't pick all the leaves. But then you also get the turnip or the beetroot as well. So two crops from one makes all the difference. Just be careful not to harvest too many leaves because otherwise that leaves no energy for the root to produce. Jenny says, Digwell, have you tried rubber snakes? I've had good results with people from high cat incidents. Rubber snakes, interesting. Turbo Stream, I need to sow in my cold frame soon. Might treat it as a small garden. Need to make a mesh cover first though. So my cold frames are set up now. I'm using cold frames. I'm using all my plants are out in my grow houses. You'll hear more about this later on, actually. Menace is going to plant some peas, also to grow up one of the fences. Last year I didn't pay it much attention with having the allotment, but I need to do better this year. Interesting. I do find an allotment does suck the energy, or suck, that's the wrong word, suck your time from the garden, I guess. Jenny says salad, dwarf tomatoes, etc. can all grow in a windowsill. Very small space garden. Actually, I've got a lot of dwarf tomatoes, the mini bell tomatoes, growing this year. And I'm not a lover of the mini bell, I have to admit. I think we've discussed this many times in the past. We find the skins to be a little bit too thick on them. But there is... if you have got a small space, it might be something to look at, dwarfing plants to grow on a windowsill. However, what I would say, you often hear people spouting about dwarf runner beans or dwarf French beans, which are all well and good, but they still take the same amount of floor space. And when it comes to things like beans, climbing plants, I don't really want them dwarfing because I want them to grow up and produce more food. If they're dwarfing, they're going to stay quite small and they're not going to produce as much food. All depends, of course, on how much floor space they need and how much space they have above it. I often do actually sow some dwarf French beans inside my veggie pod, and they only get to about that tall. They're like a foot tall, and they actually do produce quite well. But restricted space or restricted headroom, they are perfect for. Stuart says a couple of things that would grow in a small space is salad, herbs, spring onions, chard, and spinach. Good choices. Alice says some good dwarf varieties I've grown in pots. Hester runner bean, that's exactly what I was thinking of as well. Half pint peas, not tried that one. Rondo round carrots and patio baby aubergine. Interesting. Digler says, if my space was very limited, I would only grow things that really do taste better than shop bought. Tomatoes, for example. Agreed. Yeah. Tomatoes are a great example of something that tastes better when we buy it, when we grow it, than a shop bought. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and click the notifications so that you know when we go live. It's always good to have you along as well. Please do join in the conversation as well. We're always happy to hear other people's thoughts on this. Rob says, I won't be doing much in the garden at my attic for about 3 weeks. You on holiday by any chance, or what's going on? Not tried snakes, but usually every deterrent works for a week before the cats get used to it. Need to mix and match frequently. Must be a bit of a problem. Sounds like a plan, Dig. Well, just had carpal tunnel surgery, says Rob. Oh, ouch. That's not very pleasant at all. Right. I'm going to carry on this conversation in just a moment, but I'll tell you what we're going to do. Let's go to the cook along. And this week you set me the challenge for curried cauliflower steaks. Okay, so this week's recipe is cauliflower steaks. curried cauliflower steaks to be exact. Okay, so this week's recipe is cauliflower steaks, curried cauliflower steaks to be exact. So I've got here a cauliflower, and we're just going to cut this into a few slices. We only need about half of this cauliflower for what we want, but we're just going to cut it into slices like so. Obviously this isn't going to make a real steak, you need a cow for that, but this is not even going to taste like a real steak, it's just an alternative. So that's our cauliflower, which we're going to place to one side on a tray. We'll come back to that in just a moment. In the meantime, we're going to make a marinade. Now, I've just realised I haven't got over the lime that we need. So the first things first, we need a bit of lime juice. Which goes into here. Not a huge amount of lime juice. It says about a quarter of a lime. I'm going to add a bit more because I like it. Then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of sunflower oil straight into that as well. We got a bit of coriander, ground coriander, bit of salt, chili and curry powder, sorry, we'll throw that in there, turmeric, and of course cumin. Give this a bit of a stir. Make it into a nice paste. Then we bring back over our cauliflower steaks, and we're just going to now brush these over with the marinade that we've just made. It smells absolutely lovely, I have to say. Don't want to leave anything behind, do we? So I'm trying to make use as much as we possibly can and make sure they're all fully flavoured. There we go. Now all we got to do, once this is finished, bake this in the oven, gas mark 6 for about 30 minutes. Then we'll come back and see how it tastes. Okay, so 30 minutes later it is cooked. This is what it looks like, but what does it taste like? Not bad, not bad. I don't really like cauliflower, but that's not bad. I'm going to give that 8.5 out of 10. A lot of halves at the moment, but yeah, give that a good 8.5 out of 10. I'll definitely eat it again. Maybe a little bit less chili, a little bit less curry powder, but good enough. Right, back to the studio. Oh, hang on. No, I should be that. Oh, what's going on? What? There we go. That's what I want. I got there in the end. got there in the end. I've set things up slightly different because I was pushed for time today. I saw a few comments coming in during that. I love cauliflower steak. I'm not a lover of cauliflower for some reason. I don't know what it is. I'm not a lover of them. I eat them. I had cauliflower cheese today, actually, but I'm just not. It doesn't excite me for some reason. Lime juice and blood, lush. Put that lime down, says Scott. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Hope you heal quickly, Rob. Indeed, I hope you do too. Jenny, cutting that lime made me nervous. Don't try that at home, kids. I should say, you are quite right. You shouldn't hold something and try and cut it with a knife. I was doing it because I'm a silly idiot. I want to say I know what I'm doing, but accidents happen. It happens. If I'd slipped, I would have lost my fingers. Get well soon, Brian. Speedy recovery, Rob. Cheers, George. Is Darth Vader helping you? I know my breathing was really bad at that point. My breathing was really bad at that point. I know I can't breathe through my nose because of an old kickboxing injury. This nostril here is completely blocked up, so I have to breathe through my mouth, and that does make it very loud. Thanks, everybody. Sounds like Darth Vader is making cauliflower steaks. It is like it annoys me. It annoys me when I hear it on recordings. It's a pain typing with one finger on the right hand. I bet it is. My only comment, more oil, a lot more, and coat both sides. I was following a recipe that I found online, so that's why I was doing it. I have to admit, I thought it could do with a bit more oil. It actually recommended not coating on both sides because it went in the oven. I don't know. It worked. All I can say is it worked, but could have been better. Glad to see you complying with your own ingredients for the marinade. Perhaps you could have done it with broccoli if you prefer that veg. Broccoli steaks. Would that work in quite the same way? I'm not quite sure, but something to think about, isn't it? Yeah, I do prefer broccoli over cauliflower. I've never gotten on with cauliflower. Wish I did, says Andrew. I'm with you. I wish I did too. Some people really love the stuff. I just find it, I don't know. I can't. It's not. I don't dislike it. I just don't get excited by it. I've never gotten on with cauliflower. Wish I did. Have I just read that one? Love cauliflower cheese. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Works well in the air fryer. Excellent. And Digger says, I am the same, Richard. You have to use an enhanced voice filter in post-production for some videos. I do on my podcasts, actually, which remove some of that, except for these sharp intakes there in between talking. Yeah, it's annoying, isn't it? It's annoying. I know mine is because I can't breathe out this nostril at all. It's completely blocked over through kickboxing. A lovely day today, but not allowed to do anything, says Rob. See you all next week. Got a back head again. Bad head. I hope you get well, Stuart, if that's what you're saying. All the best, my friend. I like a cauliflower steamed. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Anyway, back to small space gardening. What do people think about small space gardening? Anybody got anything else they want to add? Smooth muscle massage has joined over on Instagram. But small space gardening, let's throw this up. I've said, what would you concentrate on growing if you have a small space? So I'm going to throw this up. What wouldn't you grow if you only had a small space? I probably wouldn't grow cauliflowers. As I've just said, I don't get excited by cauliflowers. I do grow cauliflowers. I just don't get excited by them. So I probably wouldn't grow cauliflowers. I probably wouldn't grow potatoes with a small space. I think that's two. I'm trying to think, is there any others that I wouldn't grow if I had a small space? I probably wouldn't grow runner beans as well, because I personally don't like runner beans. The wife does. so I only really grow them for her. But runner beans is probably another one. Digros says he wouldn't grow pumpkins. Again, I like pumpkins, so I do grow a lot of pumpkins and winter squash particularly. So I probably would still grow maybe some smaller plants, pumpkin plants, butternut squash plants, winter squash basically. I would probably grow those for winter meals. But yeah, pumpkins that can get very, very large probably wouldn't grow in a small space either. Rob also says he wouldn't grow spuds, potatoes. I'm with you on that. Totally with you on that. They need a lot of space. They take a lot of work, and they're in the ground for a long time. Jenny says, small space gardening idea. We grow themed planters for lockdown fun, e.g. a pizza planter. I like that idea. I do like that idea. Chris says, wouldn't grow anything that takes a long time to ripen and has to stay in the ground for a long time. Again, I don't disagree with that. Things like Brussels sprouts that basically take a year in the ground. Brussels sprouts, trying to think of anything else that would fall into that category. Purple sprouting broccoli. I want to say I probably wouldn't grow asparagus, but I love asparagus, but it does take, well, it's only a very short growing or harvesting period, and it takes the ground up for a long time. So probably something might not grow. We grow climbing French beans. Good, cool. I like French beans. I just don't like runner beans for some reason. Turbo Stream, I wouldn't grow potatoes or onions or runner beans in a small space. Onions is actually probably a good one not to grow as well in a small space. Makes sense. Although we do eat a lot of onions, I've realised. So I've worked out that I would need to grow over 300 different onions to be self-sufficient in onions because of the amount that we use. Near enough every day we use an onion. So yeah, I'm with you again. I love cauliflower. Had it once in a Spanish restaurant in a saffron batter drizzled in garlic and aioli. Absolutely amazing. It does sound nice. I love saffron and I love garlic aioli. So perhaps that's something we might look at in the future. I can't think of anything I wouldn't grow as it all tastes too good. I'll tell you one I definitely wouldn't grow in a small space, actually. Definitely would never, ever grow in a small space. And that is shark's fin melon, or whatever it is called now. Fig leaf gourd. That just swamps out the garden. You would have no garden left. You would just have the foliage of shark's fin melon because it gets so big. Absolutely would not grow that. Scott says, I wouldn't grow things like salad. I would grow things that make a full meal, beans, pumpkins, etc. Interesting. Very different way of doing it, but interesting. Turbostream says, I would grow soft fruit in pots, though, instead of, potatoes or onions. Again, I'm with you on that. I would grow soft fruits in pots if I had small space gardening. Rob says would have to grow tomatoes. Again, I agree. Would have to grow tomatoes in no matter what space. I think most of us do grow tomatoes, don't we? No matter what space we have. Chilies as well. Got to grow chilies in whatever space we have. Chilies tend to not take up much room. Beddoes, trying spuds in buckets this year, concentrating on the stuff we eat the most of. That makes sense, Beddoes, Ian. Hope you're well, my friend. Concentrate on the stuff, especially if you've got a small space, concentrating on the stuff that you eat the most of makes the most sense in my eyes. Chili Cake says most brassicas take a lot of space, but Austrian tree cabbage would be great. It's that the perennial cabbage that I've seen you growing. It looks absolutely amazing. Anna Jones says, wouldn't grow anything that needs covering up. That's interesting point, actually. One of the other things I would say, actually, on that note, small space gardens or small gardens generally have a warmer microclimate. They have a microclimate that is very different to larger gardens that are more open, and therefore I think you can get away with more things. Digwat says, I grow anything with high yields in short seasons. Peas, broad beans, carrots, spring onions, spinach, oriental veg, onions okay if interplanted, carrots, loads more. High yields, short, quick crops. That makes sense. Turbo Stream. I normally grow dwarf French beans anyway. I'm struggling with all onion germination again for some reason. I'm almost ready to give up on onions after last year's crop rotted off. You must have some incredibly damp soil in your allotment for, or onion white rot in your soil could be. Am I right in thinking that? Yeah. We need photos. We need photos, Turbo Stream, to try and work out what's going wrong, to try and help you out. I eat so many salads, I'd have to grow lettuce, etc. I'm the same. Every day I'm eating lettuce and salads. It's doing wonders for the weight loss. Jenny says, I've sown fig leaf. My aim is to use the foliage for compost. The seeds are sitting there, so I thought, why not? It's a good plant for foliage. It's good for, as Digwell also says, covering plants, but it is a big plant. I don't really eat many onions anyway, says Turbo Stream, so not worth the hassle, I don't think. Fair enough. I do okay mostly with stuff I can freeze, etc. Beans and cauliflower. Digger says onion white rot will not affect germination. I was thinking about later on when he says his onions are rotting out. That's what I was thinking of. But why aren't they germinating is another question. I agree. Chris says last year was bad for nearly everyone because of the wet weather we had. It's true. It was a very wet year last year, and it was not the most successful year. It's something we need to. We're hoping to have a better year this year. Every year we can hope for a better year than last year. I always think there are some things that do better in some years and worse in others. But with how warm it's been, particularly over this weekend, I think we are in for a relatively warm summer. Particularly with how dry it's been, I think we could be in for quite a dry summer as well. I'm not going to say it's roasting hot, but dry. I could be wrong. Water butts are starting to run a little empty in places, so we've got to start thinking about watering soon. It's quite surprising how quickly it's all got used up. My prediction, as you know, every year I make a prediction about this time of what type of year we're going to be in. Turbo Extreme says, seem to bolt or rot from the neck. Didn't see onion white rot though. Rot from the neck. That's usually where water's got into the flower bulb. We need photos. We need photos. Regular photos of your onions, Turbo Stream, and we'll see what's going on. Jenny says, loving this weather, but not a nice overnight good rain would be nice. Absolutely. We do need some rain to come along and just dampen the soil, fill up our water butts, and get everything going nicely. Turbo Stream, yes, last year was a write-off except for beans and cauliflower. There's always this year. So I always say there's always next year. We learn a lot from last year. We improve upon for the following year. I tell you what, right, this week mission. By the way, we did the cook along. I'm jumping on so many different things. We did the cook along. I do need a recipe for next week, something you would like me to cook up for next week. Bit of a challenge, if you like. I'm also going to do the mission. Now, last week, the mission, I'm going to have to try and do this right. The mission last week was I had made a complaint about the fact that garden centres were selling things like tomato plants and stuff like that already, which I felt was a little bit too early, unless they're making it clear. You wanted me to go and film all these plants being sold. So hopefully I'm going to do this right, because I'm going to have to phrase this as we go. So fingers crossed this is going to work. So yes, here we go. So here you can see all the tomatoes that were being sold in this garden centre. There's lots of them, different varieties. There's even some yellow ones, red ones, a whole row of them. As we get further down the other end, we can see there was some limes, some banana plants as well, some citrus and bananas, which you don't expect at this time of year. Moving on from that, brassicas, which are fine. I'm fine with that being sold at this time of year, and even as we move on through the beetroot. But then we get to the beans. I felt this is far too early to be selling beans because they're going to get too big. And that's not forgetting all the squash plants that we have over here. Peppers, squashes. Just wanted to show you that is sort of outside. Pumpkins. These plants are going to get too big when they are outside. So there we go. That was the mission for the week. Go and prove that. I need a challenge for next week. It was mentioned last week about making a birdhouse. That's still open if that is something you would like me to do. Right. Scott says, I was thinking in terms of gardening for a zombie apocalypse. You would survive longer on beans and pumpkins. They would make more meals. I don't think that's a bad idea, actually. I mean, I winter squashes store through the winter with very little need for refrigeration. Beans, if you dry them, it's not a bad idea at all. So, yeah, I'm not against that idea. I'm with you. Onions germinate best between 10 to 20 centimetres, preferably at lower end indoors, maybe too warm. You never know. I multi-sowed onions in cell trays, hardly any germination, only got 11 from a quarter tray too. I've got so many onion seeds, so what compost are you using, TurboStream? Beto says, we're still getting rain, so only water I use is for the pigs and the seeds in the greenhouse. I can't remember. Well, we had a shower a couple of days ago, Friday morning, but that was gone by the afternoon. At the moment, we're getting just lovely sunshine every day. There is a group called Survival Seeds who do just that. Is that on Facebook? I've got to check that out. I sowed in my north-facing room, Digwell, usually at 16C. Beans 2 months too early. I'm with you. I am with you. I know I'm on the south coast, but I think it's too early. Before those beans, especially runner beans, they're going to be like that tall before they can go outside. I just think it's too tall, too big to do. Jenny says, talking of banana, my first seed germinated today. Very excited. I never got banana to germinate. What did you do to get banana to germinate? Scott says, birdhouse, great idea for the mission. Would you like that for your mission, for my mission next week? I'll try my cold frame soon, as they usually do reasonably well for germination, at least. Bird box is a great idea. Looks like the bird box is going to be the idea for next week. How about making an ice house for when we are at war so we can preserve our food? That's a big mission to do. Plus, where are you going to get the ice from? Where do we get the ice from? We very rarely get freezing weather here. Ice house, for those that don't know, is a very early form of refrigeration where stately homes would have an ice house in their garden, a huge underground area. They would pack it with ice and food in order to keep the food cool for throughout the winter. Great chat, everyone, again. So I'm going to go. Bye for now. See you next week. This is Chris. I'll see you next week. TurboStream, I use my mix of 75% leaf mold with 25% John Innes number 2 for the onions. So TurboStream, what I'm going to suggest you do, bit of an experiment. Try sowing 2 lots of onions, one with your seed mix and one with just a bog standard seed compost. And let's see if there's any difference. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, but I'm just wondering if there is anything going on with the John Innes number 2 or something. Rhubarb barbecue sauce. I did a recipe for it last year, I think. Does everybody like that idea for the recipe? Rhubarb barbecue sauce. Too nutritious. Seed compost needs to be very lean in goodness. Leaf mold is very lacking in nutrition. Very lacking. Warm in the day, cool at night, keep moist and covered. Germinated in my south-facing windowsill. Okay. I wonder if interesting. That all sounds amazing, Scott. And Digger, I didn't think leaf mold contained any nutrients. I don't think it does either. And he goes on to say, "Well, try that, Richard. If I add vermiculite for drainage, I add perlite to my mixes. Perlite, vermiculite is different, but it does the same. Um, it doesn't do the same, but I add perlite. Vermiculite is just as good. Love the idea of rhubarb barbecue sauce. I'm going to do that. That's rhubarb barbecue sauce for the. Oh, Jenny, are you able to take notes of these? Birdhouse barbecue rhubarb barbecue sauce. Well, we've actually got things figured out early for a change. That makes a difference, doesn't it? What else have we got? I only have vermiculite, says Taylor Stream. So that's fine. Vermiculite and perlite basically are very similar. I brought, what was it, 100 litres of perlite from Amazon for 40 quid. And it's the same with vermiculite. So, but because I've got so much perlite, I've never bothered with vermiculite. But they do a similar thing. Perlite is more, which I always get these the wrong way around. Perlite acts more like a sponge, so it holds on to moisture, holds on to food, whereas vermiculite is more aeration, or is it the other way round? One of the two ways. You get the idea, but they both have their uses. I add them to everything that I mix up anyway. All my seed mixes, I will add perlite, partly because I've got so much of it. It looks like polystyrene, but it is, I think it is great to have in your garden, in your repertoire, in your shed, ready for use. We might have to discuss what do you add to your compost one day. Or have we done that before? I think that might make an interesting conversation. Talking of compost, if you've got a small space garden, is it worth composting? Or what would you use for composting? So for me, I think small space gardening, I'm a big fan of trying to compost. I think everybody should be trying to compost as much waste as they possibly can. In a small space, you might struggle with a compost bin, especially the 200-litre Dalek bins, but you might look at a wormery. They're a good thing in a small space, in a small garden. A wormery don't take up much space. They actually eat through a lot of compost or a lot of kitchen waste material, particularly, and you get your worm castings of worm castings at the end of it, and you get a plant food out of it in the liquid form. I've recently been sent a hot bin, which I haven't set up yet. I'm going to set it up next weekend, but I've got a hot bin as well, and that looks like it takes up less space, 200 litres, and you get the same benefits from it. You get a legit a worm food, etc., etc. So there's a lot of opportunities when it comes to composting in a small space. Actually, I think you may not be able to produce as much compost, but you can produce some compost. Digwell says, strange. I was told not to use it because of the higher tannin level. I don't know on that front. I was always told, or under the understanding, that leaf mold is fine to use as seed compost because it is so lacking in nutrients. But that's why it'd be good to see if TurboStream has any differences between using that and seed compost. Jenny says, I would use a worm farm for the castings and fluid feed. You could grow squash in a compost bin. That's a good point. A very good point there. Go and squash in a compost bin, something I do quite often, actually. Perlite best for drainage, vermiculite best for water retention in compost. Exactly right. Exactly. I knew I got it wrong. Both have their uses. Again, if you are after some, I think normally 10 litres in a garden centre is £10, but Amazon 40 litres. No, 100 litres for £40. That's what I always go for now. It is a big box when it arrives. It is a lot of material, but it can be stored. It doesn't go off Turbo Stream says, I've been rewatching Jeffrey Smith's Veg Garden on YouTube. He put manure in the bottom of the seed tray with peat as the grow medium. The idea is the roots then find the manure and grow stronger. Don't know. I don't know. There's some logic to it. It depends how thick and how well rotted the manure is, because there is a risk it could be too powerful for the roots and burn them. Unlikely if it's well rotted, though. Would a rich compost stop seed germination? Would it? I don't think it would stop seed germination. What I think it would do is when the seeds are growing, is too much for the plant to absorb when it's not really photosynthesizing. So it's sort of being overfed and not growing enough. Does that make sense? That's my thoughts. And I can't really think about it or explain what I'm thinking, to be honest. Chili Gate, it depends what waste you will be creating for composting, grass, tree cuttings, etc., or just kitchen waste. Well, I think if you're in a small space garden, you're unlikely to be having tree prunings, maybe fruit bushes or something you might have growing in pots. And even the grass, you're going to have very little of. So the chances are this is going to be more kitchen waste and foliage waste from plants and stuff. That's my thought. That's my thought in a small space garden. But again, it is right. What would you think of? It's yeah. This is why we're asking you. Digwell says maybe not germination. Richard has just said it. Seedlings die before they emerge. Could be what's going on. It could be what's going on. The issue with the youngins is very poor germination to start with, yet the leeks did well in the same compost mix. Are you using fresh onion seed? Because a lot of people are trying to use onion seed that is over a year old. Onion seed leeks, I think, can tolerate a couple of years, but onion seeds generally struggle when the seeds are a year old. And I've done this myself this year. I planted some or sowed some onion seeds that never germinated. So I started again. Digger does say different plants. Talking about the leeks, let's check Instagram. Nothing going on Instagram this week. Yeah, lots of things to think about, isn't there? Anybody got any thoughts on what Turbo Stream is having the problem with? Where did you get your seed from? Says Rob. And I see the seeds were the Veg Ground podcast, but I can't remember how old they were. Well, I sent onion seeds out in December, and I think in October, or was it August and December, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but they would be the fresh seed. But I do send onion seeds out pretty much every December, so it's possible you had some from the year before. Check the dates. Check the dates on them, but yeah, just trying to think. I always put the use by dates. I don't put the month that they were sent. Perhaps I should include those month and year on the packets to make it clearer. My old shallot had very poor germination. New seeds were very good. Beaner seeds, Veg Ground podcast seeds are crap. Cheers, Digwell. I'll say that about yours, shall I? Seed Megastore. Turbo Stream. I would have used the new seeds, I think. No, they would have been fresh. My ones then, because all the seeds that I send out as the Veg Ground Podcast Supporters Club get, I sowed those as well as a bit of a quality control. And all mine have came up pretty well. So I suspect it's not the seeds, but again, mine came up really, really well. I had 100% germination, I would say, on my seeds. They were sown in December, and we sown some in August as well. Yeah, I wonder. Still have no word from them, Richard. Ordered on the 7th of March. Don't know. Yeah. I was going to ask you actually what if you had heard anything. I haven't found anything out, I'm afraid. Do you have hard water, Turbo Stream? Does your water want to start a fight with you all the time? Is it fighting with the youngins? I think that's what Jenny is saying. It's so hard, it's not letting the youngins grow. Or perhaps the youngins are just scared of the hard water, that they're staying in that. Right. What have we got? Instagram. Chambers Farm Flowers has joined over on Instagram. So I did do well in the previous years on Boxing Day. The best germination was direct in the cold frame. Again, I mean, mine do go in the heated propagator on Boxing Day, but if they're indoors, it should be okay. Again, is this always using your own mix of leaf mold and compost? This is going on one now, isn't it? Let's encourage everyone else. Anyone else got any thoughts or anything they want to add about small space gardening? Jenny says, we have hard water and my seedlings don't like it. I have to let my water sit in a can for a few hours to allow the chlorine to evaporate. Is chlorine and hard water affected? Because I didn't think they were. Chlorine is a chemical that cleans things. Hard water is to do with calcium, because we're in very hard water here because it comes through the chalk that we have in this here. We have wonderfully soft water in Birmingham, straight from mid Wales. There you go. Hard water. Let's have a quick look at your photos, shall we? So Nathan has shared his first signs of spring, and that is this asparagus poking up through the soil. We love asparagus here. It's so good to see it starting to grow every year. It's a good sign. Our seedlings have grown well. We've got last year's asparagus starting to shoot through the ground as well. It's always a good sign, and I love asparagus. I eat lots of asparagus. Now, I found this quite interesting. Digwell shared these photos of his dibbers. Are these the square foot gardening as well? Because that would make sense. He's used Lego to make these dibbers, the correct spacing, dibs them in the ground and drops a single seed in. And I want to go get some Lego and start making these again. I think they are a great idea. Now, Gary sent these pyramid cloches that he has on his allotment. Got to say, these were really, really cool. Interesting shape, but not very useful, I believe. Especially when you look at all the grass underneath, unless you're in the center, it does get pushed into the wrong area. And Chili Kate has spent Mother's Day on the allotment. Why not? Why not spend Mother's Day on the allotment if you're a mother? It's probably one of the best places to be. And I hope the kids were helping down on the allotment as well. Now, Kate has also been sharing, this other Kate, this true story. I think all gardeners would say that. If you see a glass half full, if you're an optimist, it's half full. If it's a pessimist, it's half empty. If it's a plant person, it's a propagation station. I think it's definitely a propagation station. Now, please do keep sharing your photos. You can post them in our Facebook group, send to me via social media, or email me, richard@veggroundpodcast.co.uk. That's richard@veggroundpodcast.co.uk. So the first sowing was in John Innes #1 seed compost. What's your drainage like in the pots that you're sowing them in? Are they getting too wet? We have wet water. I don't like it, says Rob. That damn wet water gets in the way, doesn't it? It should be dry water. You know, I used to dream about inventing a canned water. You buy it, it's just a powder, and you just add water to make water. Digwell says, but not too far from hard water, maybe using saved rainwater is an issue. That's a good point, actually, yeah. Always use tap water for seeds and seedlings. It needs chlorine to kill pathogens in the soil. Yes, I am this is something I actually don't use rainwater for my seedlings. I save rainwater for my larger plants, of course, but not my seedlings, because there could be stuff inside that rainwater that can cause problems to our young plants. So yeah, definitely with you on that. If you're using rainwater, that could be problems as well. We can't drink our water, it tastes nasty. Enough. The YouTube channel lost all their seedlings a year or two ago. The same problem. If it's high chlorine, then yeah, I can believe that, because chlorine, I mean, I know when I go swimming, my eyes burn from all the chlorine. So I can only imagine what it does to plants. But even that, there's got to be a really high levels of chlorine for it to be a problem. TurboStream, have never used rainwater for seedlings, always tap water at room temperature. That should be a problem then. And Digwa says, no, my Lego dibbers are only 5 centimetre and 7 centimetres square for pots. You need to watch the videos. There we go. That makes a lot of sense. I might have to go and get some Lego someday. I sell dehydrated water on eBay. Yeah, that's it. Some seed compost stay very wet on the bottom layer. Maybe first roots rot off. Or another question, I'm just wondering, how deep are you sowing your seeds? I mix my own compost because the bagged peat-free compost was awful and full of flies. I can't win, can I? You can win. You can win. We've just got to find out what's going wrong. It seems weird that all your onions are going through that. I'm trying to think, what can it be? How deep is your onions being sown? We'll come back to that. I must admit, says Andrew, some of the best drinking water I have tried is at my mother's in Surrey. Some of the best I've ever tried was in Scotland, in my father-in-law's place in Scotland, but he don't live there anymore. Maybe one day I'll get to sample that water once again. I'm wondering, this has got us all baffled about these onions, isn't it? Why aren't they germinated? Why is the germination so poor? Generally speaking, seeds will only germinate when the conditions are right. So, right temperature, right humidity, right moisture level in the soil. Onion seeds don't like to be over a year old, granted, but fresh seed are normally pretty reliable. How deep are they being sown? How damp is the soil? TurboStream goes on. The seeds are on top of the compost with a light dusting of compost and vermiculite. So that should be okay. Chlorine in tap water is around 2 parts per million max. Much higher is bad for health. What about in swimming pools? Because that really stings my eyes. I only drink water mixed with hops. Digwell, our water smells and tastes like a swimming pool. It's terrible. Or whiskey. Digwell says onion seeds 10 mil deep. 10 mil deep, a centimetre deep. I'm trying to think how deep I did mine. I probably are half a centimetre deep I did mine, but again, yeah, I wonder. I clearly am not providing the right conditions yet, the correct conditions. It could be any number of things. As I said, conditions are usually what triggers a seed to germinate, when it gets the right conditions. But that doesn't mean that that's the only thing going wrong, because I find it interesting. I wonder. TurboStream, Jeffrey Smith said to not even cover onion seeds. I mean, I give mine a very light dusting. They're probably only about half a centimetre deep. Who knows? Anybody got any other thoughts on what could be wrong? In the meantime, I'm going to move on to a Richard's rant. And this week's rant, I'm going to do live while talking to you. I've done a video for this one. I ran out of time. Now, My rant this week is, why do companies feel the need to plaster their product name all over their products? Now, I'm obviously stood here. We've got Jay's Fluid with their name written on that, or Shell on Earth with their name written on that. I'm fine with these small stuff. What I really, really don't like is things that I have in the garden. I brought a veg trug plant nursery this week. This is a wooden shelf with a cover over it, the type I usually hate. But I got one of those this week. And on it is this huge plaque saying veg trug. And it annoyed me for some reason. Now, why did it annoy me? Because it's in the garden, because I'm going to be really the only person that sees it. I know where it came from. I don't need to know it's made by Veg Trug. Sure, a little label would be fine, but a big label is where I have a problem. Years ago, Veggiepod also never used to have their labels or their name on their products. Or if they did, it was quite a small, discreet thing. But now they seem to have it plastered across their products. And for me, it ruins the aesthetic of these products. Having this huge sign saying VegTrug or Veggiepod or any of the other brands that can be out there. I don't mind if it's discreet. And I guess this all started with cars, where they would have the make and the model on the back of a car. But I would describe that as being quite discreet. You could look at a car and from the side not know necessarily the manufacturer. But when the size of the label, the branding is bigger than the product itself, or takes up a lot of the space on the product, for me it becomes annoying because it detracts away from what can look good to becoming a brand item advertising in my garden. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you get my rant? And do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments. It just grated on me having this huge sign saying VegTrug that was nailed onto this piece of wood that I'm having to build, and it was on there. It annoyed me. It annoyed me a lot. If it was a small label, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. It wasn't. It was a large label in somewhere very prominent so that it can be seen. Right, Digwell, RHS, sown seeds 1.3 centimetre, half-inch deep in rows, 20 centimetres apart. Thin out the seedlings first to 5 centimetres apart and later to 10 centimetres, 4 inches. I guess that would be sowing direct, which is something you could do, of course. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the discussion on my inept onion germination. Not a problem. We're happy to try it and help and figure this out. Digwell says, or whiskey. The first is Scottish, the second is American. Oh, something going on. Irish is with an E as well. I do like whiskey. I'm with you, Richard. I hate advertising, especially when it's being shoved in your face. Yeah, it's just so big signs on them. That's what really, really annoyed me. I don't, and I just say this, I'm a brand. I have a brand labeling on my stuff. But it's in places where you expect it. I don't expect it on something in my back garden. You don't need to advertise it to me. I've already got it. It's in my back garden. We may have guests around every now and then. They may see it. Obviously, yes, I've set this up with some brand recognition going on in the background. But it's not. In my back garden, it's for me. Nobody else is going to see it. Digwell says, I kind of agree. Not built my veg trucks yet, but I know it has a big logo on it. It annoys me. It really, really does annoy me because they're just so big, just so in your face. I feel like taking a big old staple gun remover and taking a label off because it annoys me so much. Digwell says sowing direct and sowing sales is basically the same. Pretty sure the seed is not aware of where it is. Yeah, what I meant by that, I was being a bit flippant with the thinning out and things when it comes to sowing direct. Although it did give me an idea. Perhaps I should sow some onions directly in the soil and see how it compares. It's no good down on the allotment. have to do that here at home. Down on the allotment, anything that I sow direct would just get swamped out by what do you call it, couch grass, which is why I can't sow anything directly on the allotment. Well, we are coming up towards, we're in the last 5 minutes of tonight's show. I know this clock change has been thrown me a little bit, and I'm feeling very, very tired for some weird reason. I guess technically I was up at 5:30. Just looks like the sun is starting to set, so that means we can get to the allotment after work this week. Maybe not tomorrow, but one day this week or several days this week, get to the allotment after work. Now, next week, we've already set the mission and the cook along. I can't remember what they were off the top of my head, but do you want to talk about what you add to compost in your garden? And this could be for seed sowing, could be for sowing for seeds, or for plants that go in pots. What do you add to your compost to make your mixes? That's something I would like to talk about next week. Is that something that would interest you? Toby Strew says, I would have thought a north-facing room would be ideal, always around 16C. Anyway, sure, I will work something out. Yeah, that sounds pretty good temperature. I'm trying to think. It's confusing me why they're not germinating, Turbo Stream. Jenny says, I'm off to water a very dry garden and potted plants. Full sun forecast here tomorrow. I do mine in the morning. Bird box and rhubarb barbecue sauce. That's it. Next week, the art of onion germination. I think we've gone into that tonight. No, Richard and everyone. I enjoyed this time with you. Andrew, it's always a pleasure to see you as well as it's a pleasure to see everybody that joins in each week. Digwell says, clocks change while playing in the arse, crossing the Atlantic on a Royal Navy ship, 4 hours in a week. Yeah, that must have been a bit of a problem. Yeah, do compost additives, what you add to your compost mixes. Does that sound like something you would want to talk about next week? I'm open. We've got 2 minutes to go. So if anybody wants to throw any other suggestions or say yay or nay to that, then feel free. Oh, I'm looking forward to getting in the bath tonight, though. Jenny says, I've made note, Richards. I have popped them over later. Thank you. Timer stream. Yes, compost next week. That's not a problem. We will talk about that next week. Compost sounds good. Digger says, TTFM. Oh, compost additives sound good. There we go. Well, I think that just about sums it up. Let's recap. So, small space gardening. What we've said is grow what you like to eat. Grow what you feel you're going to benefit the more. Don't grow things that are going to take up a lot of space or a lot of time, all the space for a long time throughout the year. Grow up where you can and make the most of going up and growing high. Make the most of the space that you do have, including front gardens, back gardens, and up and down and left and right. And don't forget to things that are a little bit imaginative. So that's recap. Everybody seems to be agreeing with compost additives and compost mixtures. Sounds good. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. I think we are just about there. I'm looking forward to hitting the bed tonight. I can tell you that. Anyway, guys, I think that is about it. Thanks so much for joining me again. We will be doing again next Sunday at 6 p.m. UK time for those that may be a little bit confused with the time. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And any mothers not with us, we're thinking of you as well. Right, guys, you take care. I'll speak to you again next Sunday.